Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you may be around the world. Thank you for taking your time today to join us for this webinar, Agile Marketing, Meeting the Customer Wherever They Are. I want to thank Dave Dame, our professional Scrum trainer, for joining us today to bring you this webinar. And my name is Eric Nayberg, and I'll be your host and moderator. Let's go to the next slide. So just some quick guidelines. Your microphones are muted. But please ask questions. Ask questions. You can see here in the picture how to ask those questions in the GoToWebinar panel. Just click on questions and type away. We will take them as we go. We will take some at the end, and those that we can't handle during the session, we'll follow up on post-session. Next slide. So just briefly, before we get into the meat, for those of you new to this series, who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org provides training and certification around Scrum, as well as continuing to evolve Scrum. We're founded by and led by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, who is and continues to be our chairman. We continue to evolve Scrum by making updates with Jeff Sutherland on the Scrum Guide and providing lots of free resources to help you to continue to learn. In our mission to improve professionalism in using Scrum, we're constantly adding new training materials, adding new videos like this one, and other content that really help you to improve how you work in your understanding of Scrum. Next slide. So with that, I will hand it over to Dave to let him introduce himself, and we'll take it from there. Dave Dame, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. My name is Dave Dame. Currently, I'm the Vice President of Global Agile at Scotiabank. I've helped numerous companies transition from how they worked before to a more agile way of work. And it's because I've worked in many different realms. I've worked in advertising, software engineering, product management, and all different levels of leadership. So the thing is, I've seen a lot, and I've been able to really harness and utilize all my experience to really help organizations move forward. And I'm also proud to represent Scrum.org as one of their professional Scrum trainers. Next slide. So before we kick this off, I think it's important that we look at how we marketed before Agile and even before technology. I won't say what year I graduated university, but my first job was I worked at an ad agency in marketing. And the way we used to do marketing before was we did research to try to understand who our potential buyers might be and try to learn a bit about them and then figure out which touch points we could really find. So we'd either look at different types of media, magazines they might subscribe to, newspapers, or even TV ads. But because we couldn't really target a specific type of customer, we had to take a very generic approach. And then we had to be able to produce all of this, which was at a huge cost because we had to produce commercials, produce high-level media print. And the thing is, we couldn't, once we launched a campaign, there was little we could do once it was launched. We had to wait till it was done, and then we would have huge lagging indicators to look at it about a year after to see how that was done. Next slide. So when we look today, let's look at really how we operate today. We use technology more than ever before, and we're no longer just really pushing out to a customer. The customer is allowed to have a two-way conversation, and they can even interact with the product more intimately. If we all look at our smartphones and look at around the room, you will notice you or your friends or peers have different kinds of apps. And we can really target what kind of person it is by the different types of apps they got. So now we can do more targeted marketing, and we can even build data into our products to see how our customers are using it in real time. So we can learn with the customer as we're going, which is really great. but our products have become complex. Technology has been complex. So now that things are moving quicker, marketing kind of started slowing down because they couldn't keep up with Agile because Agile moved around very iteratively to be able to build what the customer wants instead of selling what the customer wants. So I've noticed organizations that I help struggle with how do we balance marketing both from a strategic and a tactical way? And how do we leverage all these technologies like internet, digital, and technology, and even social media platforms? Next slide. So now that technology is building products quicker than it's ever been, we've had to iterate. And really, the way we deal with the things we used to has changed completely. We have to create a new muscle memory of we can't get the product spec sheet about 7 or 8 months in advance because the teams are going to start building it almost instantaneously. So we had to start changing our muscle memory and look at how do we still kind of do our due diligence of mid to long-term strategy, but how can we react and then change the communication from where it used to be the marketing would talk to the development team of, or the development team would talk when their dates are, to now we're trying to get that learning that the development teams are getting from building the products and interacting with the customer. So we're actually trying to get people that are exclusively sitting in the marketing departments solely and get them more sitting with squads as things go. Next slide. So now that we can really tell people personally, we can respond to them in real time. We're no longer having to spend all our money at once. We're really able to do a lot of A/B testing and sensing and responding to see what campaigns work. This really allows us to quickly target what specific customer we're looking for, what type of behaviors they're looking for, and really reach out to them. But we moved from when we try to sell to our customer to now our customers almost become our brand ambassadors. If they really like it, we can use their content of when they tweet, when they use Facebook or Instagram, we can reshare that and they become our best voice, our best brand. Because we used to say getting an employee, a happy customer would give us so many referrals. Now with social media, happy customers can increase your channels for free if you get it right. But then that's a dual-edged sword. Either we can get it really good, or if we get it really bad, then we got to react to it. So we need to move more nimble and quickly, and we're changing from selling our story to our customers to now our customers become part of the story. And if you use the Nike app, you'll notice people are interacting with other people, sharing their fitness goals, sharing their workout routine. So now people want to be with the app, not because it's exclusively a Nike brand, but the social pressure of interacting with their people has really made it compelling for them to join the product that they might not look at previously. So how do we do this? That's usually the first question everybody will ask is how do you, and you need to do it in kind of a hybrid model. You first have a model, next slide, that looks at the big strategy. We still need to do that, and that's how we conventionally work, but the way we dissect it is completely different. Can you transition the transition? So what we need is we need a marketing department focusing on a strategy, but the key is making the strategy flexible because instead of executing the strategy all at once, we're really iterating it small piece by piece as they go through. So that way we can really get insights, learn from it and adjust it So we spend our dollar a lot more wiser. That requires the department to really have kind of people that are working collaboratively with the teams. And I've seen models where they have a dedicated member on the squad or scrum team that's part of the marketing group. But I've also seen it where they're part-time members and they need to share how often they react. Because the real success between whether it's good or great is how the two departments flow from each other and learn, because now we got the ability to deliver products and services quicker. We also have the ability to deliver targeted messaging and testing and really using our dollar a lot more wisely. And a lot of people are starting to bring, which they use agencies in-house, because now with all the technology tools and platforms and rapid learning, they find that they can use their dollars and really pivot quicker when everybody's within the same organization. So it goes from trying to think of it all up front to like how Agile helps everything else by doing a lot of sense and responding on how they're doing.
So Dave, can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by a hybrid model?
Yeah, so what I mean by hybrid model is you can't have the marketing people just distributed to every Scrum team. They still need to go and kind of do their long-term budgeting forecast strategy of how the marketing function is going to operate. So you need people that are really kind of focused and dedicated to that. But you also need a part of the team that's separate that can work with the Scrum teams together so they can still do their planning, forecasting, and research on the users and use the Agile part to help them deliver, sense, and respond in a frequent way. So what I mean hybrid is you're still doing strategy with one group and having one group work closely with the Scrum teams. And it's important that these two groups work really collectively together to make sure that they're rapidly sharing and learning and feeding back information both from the marketing group to the Scrum teams who have that direct impact to the final end product to the customer. Did that answer your
Perfect.
question, Eric?
It did. That's perfect. Thank you.
So what does it mean to be an agile marketer? The main role is to understand what products are being built and the reason why. They can't wait for a long spec sheet that's been approved. That's why they need part of their hybrid model to be really sitting closely with the Scrum team, because the details of the product and even the product strategy itself might change in a rapid agile way. So for them to understand it, they almost got to be sitting with the teams, being part of the engineering groups, or sitting through all the Scrum events to learn what's going on. And it's not to be a passive role. Sometimes they can help the Scrum team understand what why they're building out, what the problem space is, and what our competitive advantage is, so they can exploit it. And then that way, that conversation's happening more directly. So that way they get to hear what things are getting done firsthand. And the dev team can tell them why and how the technology solution may be even a selling point. I've noticed when marketers and the team is sat together, it was interesting to hear see the marketing people's eyes when the dev team can show them how something they built, like a chat engine, can be exploited to be a marketing campaign communication thing. And and then when I talked to the marketers afterwards, they said, it's interesting that engineers are thinking about the customers as much as we are. And because they always thought they were the technical people. But building that relationship really helps that everybody can sense and respond together. And that way, that group can report back to the central marketing group to understand, hey, we have this new capability the engineering team did. How can we use it as a separate channel to push some campaigns down or some content down?
So Dave, do you have any examples as to things that you've done to help teams realign and realign the work, the communication, if teams start going off in different directions?
Yeah, well, the first real challenge, Eric, is getting them to dedicate people to the Scrum teams and squad because they're like, no, we're the marketing experts. We got to work together. And it's really hard to break them out of that cohesive function that they've done so well for so long to really understand that they got to really radiate within the organization and work kind of more closer to the product than they ever did. And it takes the right type of person, right? You can't send somebody that isn't a good collaborator, isn't really kind of have that spirit of how can I help and curious about the technology. So you need a marketing person that's not really a programmer by me, but really gets geeked out about the technology and curiosity and stuff. And you get them on the teams. And then the next biggest problem is the people that are on the Scrum teams, really reminding them they have a dual service of communicating back to the central marketing team. And I found we've tried this in a variety of ways, either separate meetings or they have a meeting right after the sprint reviews. They're brought into some backlog refinement meetings, or they do Scrum of Scrums to really communicate more frequently. But it takes them a while because when you get the right people on the Scrum teams, they forget that they got to radiate out in the organization. So the same challenge we have with the central group not realizing they got to radiate out. It's really making sure those connections happen, which is no different than any other central function with when you get them to work with the Scrum team. And then you just got to measure, right? Figure out what type of new data are you looking for? Are we looking for, do they just download our product? Are we looking at that they're using our product? What areas of the product? So then we got to really start working with the data more. And that's usually, from my experience, the marketing people that sit with the Scrum team begin educating the central marketing group on what the data is, what it means to them, and that way they can try to use that data to think about some new type of marketing testing techniques to really be able to see what gets more traction and what doesn't.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Now, do we have any questions on the call?
Yeah. I mean, these are questions I've been taking from the call itself. So, and we'll keep them going as we come in.
All right, and some of the other big challenges I've noticed in my time as well is when it comes to approvals, right? We know that there's regulatory compliance and stuff that we got to do correctly and right. But what I noticed with marketing and copywriting, and even when we go into that hybrid model, the central group still wants a final approval for messaging and branding, and I get it, right? Because they have all the expertise and experience, and we likely wouldn't have got where we are if it wasn't for them. But if we result in things being centrally approved, that slows down the Scrum team and squads, and it usually doesn't scale properly. So the next big challenge I have is really getting them from being the sole approver to really educating their people that are working with the Scrum teams and squads to be able to look at it with the same kind of lens they would to ensure it's on brand, on target, on stuff. And I get where they're coming from because before technology, if you remember, I shared how expensive it was to do print media, magazines, and commercials. And the recall rate if something was wrong was super expensive and super dangerous. But now that we're delivering on a technology digital platform, we're continuously connected. So even if we make a slight mistake or slight error, the cost of correction is seconds and a low cost. It's no length of time, it's no exuberant money. we can correct it almost on the fly. So now that the risk is lowered, and we really use those central people's experience that approves it to teach others to have that same kind of eye, that same kind of commitment and conviction, then you begin scaling where everybody can have multiple sets of eyes on it. Because, like you know, Eric, if I proofread something, I'll catch everything I find. But if we hand it off to other people, they find other stuff. So by getting more people, more sets of eyes looking on it, still having that one approver for the team to make sure the messaging is right. That way, by scaling decisions down, we don't get a roadblock. And I've seen a lot of companies fail because even though they would go in a hybrid model, they wouldn't give up that approval control. And I get it, it's hard. You need to work on it and you need to phase it in to get the confidence. But if you want to truly unleash the power of test and learn, you have to let that central approval go and focus your time on coaching and educating people to have that same resilience.
Sure.
How does this relate to what you've seen, Eric?
Yeah, I think getting marketing closer to the product and involved early and often is critical. I've spent most of my career in product ownership, product marketing, product management type roles. And the minute we get pulled too far away from the actual product team, we lose sight of what's happening. And at the same time, the product team ends up going off often in a direction that isn't aligned necessarily with the customer and where the organization is going or needs to go. So I think it's really kind of the hybrid model is exactly that and perfect because it helps us to really look together and work together on a common goal and on a common mission, which actually leads to a question that came up, and oh, I just lost it. Um, so should we include other roles in here like sales, customer support?
It depends because, see, when sales comes, from my experience, they're good at influencing or they're good at selling things that we haven't built yet. And I've worked on a career of trying to catch up with sales all my life. But because marketing has to be integrated in the product, they're no more separable deliverables. They're actually almost one and the same. I think helping with sales and getting them in sprint reviews and even backlog refinement to understand what might be coming down the pipe might be good. But for the example of sales, I haven't seen where the benefit of having them dedicated to the Scrum team would give value. The reason why we started with marketing is it was quickly becoming apparent that because now the product is being built in near real time, marketing was struggling catching up. And it was because nobody really worked with them to go, how do we adjust to our new way of working? But the same kind of model can be also applied for certain kind of architects and stuff that need to be integrated in. If you can, if you can do that, yeah. But sales, from my experience, they've been helpful in sprint reviews to know what the market conditions are, what people are asking for. But you know what other functions really good to work, Eric, is maybe not sales, but customer support. They're really the gold mine of customer information that I haven't seen a lot of organizations take advantage of it from the start because they're the first ones to hear everything that people don't like about the product. Because not too often they call and go, it's amazing. But having customer support, working closely with the Scrum team and backlog refinement and seeing what's done helps two things. It helps us being aware of what our pain points are in our product that might not be market driven, right? There could be, customers are upset by how long it takes to install an upgrade if you're using enterprise products. So having that information would definitely help you adjust your backlog.
Yeah,
So
I agree, Dave. I mean, what I've seen is when sales gets too involved, we often get what I call happy ears. It's what one customer said or wanted from one meeting. It doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do for the overall customer or user base. And even that customer, and I've seen this so many times, I see it with CEOs as well, by the way, where they come back from one customer meeting and say, oh, we need to do all these things. And they really didn't validate it and vet it with the customer. It came up in conversation of, if you add this, we would buy more. Well, okay, what is this really? What do you really mean? And all of a sudden we start changing our direction and adding new capabilities. The other negative I've seen when sales is involved too early is they start selling the future. And remember, everything we're doing is not a commitment, it's a forecast. So next thing you know, sales is out there committing to these new features that were being discussed. Um, product,
Sadly, that problem has happened long before Scrum ever came to be.
yes, it is. Yes, it did. So having sales working with the product owner, giving feedback in sprint reviews, I think it's perfect. I think having sales on the Scrum team, I agree with you, is uh, could actually hurt as much as help.
Well, I could see them even, and I've never tried this because maybe it might be my own biases, but I was scared that they would go to the developers. Look, I know what you committed on building, but I have a sale down the pipe. Can you just do this little tweak? And then, it's kind of like bringing the wolf in the hen house.
Yep, absolutely. There's lots of questions, but keep going, Dave, and I'll bring them in as they're appropriate.
No, I wanted to know what your thoughts were on the customer support too, because I think having them more connected because they're not trying to sell anything. They're just trying to make customers happier. What has been your experience with that? Was that aligned with my experience, Eric? Or
It is. They're certainly hearing the real usage of the product. Often sales here is what management thinks is going to be the usage, and I've spent a lot of time in sales and then certainly in sales meetings. I worked at IBM for several years in Rational Software and went on lots of sales calls, and you often didn't talk to the users. Customer support talks to the actual users and gets the real feedback of how is this thing being used, what are the problems people are having, or how are people trying to use it differently. My experience is often we build a product with one intent and it's used in ways that we maybe didn't intend, whether it's just user interface type ways or the actual use of the product. Um,
or
and
even ethical hacking, right? Like people exploit it to what it wasn't intended for.
exactly, and the way to really identify a lot of that is talking to the real users, and often support becomes that front line. They're the front line of to the user itself and getting that feedback. So getting that feedback in, whether they're part of the Scrum team or certainly a key component stakeholder with the product owner, becomes critical to getting that feedback in. Often support is thought of as just the folks that provide the bug information or defect information, and that's not the case. We need to leverage support for usability and user feedback beyond just bugs and adding bugs to backlogs.
And they know the use cases as well, right? When they're talking to the customers, they understand at which time were they using it, what was the situation, and what was the user going through when they encountered the problem. And another benefit I find too is having customer support on the team. They're aware before the product is released what new features are, so they're prepared to answer questions when they get calls almost immediately from when you release it.
Yep, absolutely. So a question that kind of I doesn't necessarily tie to this, but I think it's an important one to make sure there's some clarity in what we're talking about here. Patrick asks, "Hi Dave, what's the dev team doing? Are they creating content? Are they writing code? Uh, in it's a hybrid. They're doing different things. But can you go into a little more detail? What is the development team in Scrum in this hybrid model doing?"
Well, from my experience, so let's say a Scrum team has full of multiple capabilities, right? The developers aren't usually writing content, but they want to know what containers they need to build, or what needs to be in certain areas of that digital landscape space. So they're really trying to work with the marketer, and the marketer might be using other members that might have been traditionally a BA and stuff, helping get requirements to together write the content. But the development team is trying to understand that information architecture of really how to place the material, what it needs, and those kind of things. So they're really trying to make sure they build the vehicle in which that message can go.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
No problem. And that was probably the end of my talk because I was going to just respond to Q&A. So if you have a few more, keep them coming.
Yep, we absolutely do. Let's look through a couple of these and in pick some and we'll keep going. So here's one, and this kind of applies to Scrum in general, whether we're talking about Scrum and marketing or not, but how does the long-term strategy get modified over the course of multiple sprints? And does it get modified over sprints?
That's a great question. From my experience, it does. They don't at first because they think, oh, well, the team just has to catch up to the strategy. But when I see it getting done working really well, the marketing strategy is almost like a roadmap, and they're adjusting it based on how they're learning different customer behaviors. Because if you remember, there was a time, Eric, where we tried to figure that out all up front, even before we did a campaign launch. Now we might be learning it just in real time or just slightly ahead of our campaign so we can immediately begin filling in the details. Because remember, the strategy might be high level, but they're getting the details as people are using the product more, and we're able to track how they're using it. And then if we have the ability to find out demographics about those users, to feed the details into the marketing plan that we used to do up front, but we kind of do it in lockstep now, which is great because it allows it to be flexible, but still well informed so we can use for future projects.
Yep, that's great. So in your experience, Dave, most sprint reviews, well, actually, your experience may not be this way, but in Can's experience, most sprint reviews don't have content that really impact marketing strategy. How do you attract people responsible for marketing strategy to join the sprint reviews consistently? In his experience, I believe it's a him, in their experience, we'll put it that way, after 2 sprint reviews, they stop attending. So what are some of the strategies? What are some of the things that you have done to help make sure marketing stays engaged at the sprint review level?
Yeah, I've had those challenges too. What I try to get them to do is this is the only way you're going to learn what we're building in product. We're not going to give you separate spec sheets. We're not going to give you any other supporting collateral because when they don't go, it's because we're giving them that information by other means. You really have to quit doing all that extra administrative work to support the old way of working and make it where it's critical that they need to be at the sprint review to get that information. And then it allows them to ask questions that might be different than how they used to get it in reports and spec sheets. So it's really make sure that it's a necessity for them to go because if they want to know who they're marketing to or what they're marketing to, force them to come. And because they don't want to rely solely on the members on the team, because that's why we work as teams. We need those diverse perspectives that if somebody misses something, maybe somebody else will catch it or they'll have a different perspective on it. So one, make the need that they have to attend by not supplementing it any other way. But when it doesn't match what they wanted, highlight that so and track those problems as an organizational problem so that way it becomes put in there every day. And then I also usually go to their EAs and have them put the sprint reviews in every calendar.
And I think part of it is what we're delivering fully impacts marketing, and what marketing is delivering fully impacts what we need to deliver. Marketing is kind of our face to the world of that product, of whatever's being built. And if they're not feeling like they're a part of the strategy, that's part of the problem. So getting marketing to be a part of the strategy, not a receiver of the strategy, often helps getting that engagement to occur.
Well, remember what I said in the beginning. It's not like we're working in different camps anymore. The product is what we're marketing. The product is marketing itself. The product is getting exposure out there. So if we're merging marketing and product together for the most part, why not have a hybrid blending of the organizations?
Yep, absolutely. So kind of keeping up. So what if the marketing team is the only team working with Scrum in the company? How do you handle the requests from sales and management in that case?
That want to come to it, they can come to the sprint review, absolutely. But as long as they're not distracting from the feedback. I've never really, they have that problem initially because nobody wants to be the one left out. What I used to do as a product owner was I would run the sprint review because the danger of bringing a salesperson in, Eric, what I've learned is they take over the sprint reviews, right? They want to own the room. That's their persona. That's how they operate. But then it takes away the purpose of the sprint review, which is to get the Scrum team's feedback on what to do with the product next. So marketing is, they're having a good conversation because they got to be aligned. But for sales and groups even outside of sales, as a product person, I would run an independent demo of it from the sprint review to keep them up to date so both they feel included, and if there's any relevant information, I'll bring it back to the team. But that way it allows finance to come, HR to come, because what you don't want is your sprint reviews to grow with so many stakeholders that it becomes an audience and not a feedback session. So as a product person, do an independent demo at a regular cadence to put those groups that aren't part of the teams involved in it.
Yeah, great. So do you see any risk of the marketing person within the Scrum team getting isolated because their work is different compared to the rest of the Scrum team? Or would you advise to have a similar number of Scrum team members that are marketers? What are your suggestions about how you kind of overcome some of those scenarios?
I see that alienation happening in two scenarios. I see it in the one you described it as, what are you doing here? You can only do marketing type stuff. What I try to do is I do kind of a skills inventory with the team on Team Liftoff, and everybody gets to see the skills of what one others do, and then ask the question, what skills do you want to learn that somebody has on the team? To get them to work on other things that might not be solely marketing, to do that. Or what I see them doing is they really usually pair up well with the dev team members that are using Lean UX to really understand the user because they get that information firsthand to really see that. So I see the marketing person really busy in customer interviews if they're having it or regular customer feedback sessions. They're really getting a ton of information, but they might also be doing CSS sheets and stuff to do lookout, lay, and feel. But I also see alienation, Eric, that when the marketing person is on the Scrum team, they almost get alienated from the marketing central function because they're not seen as one of them anymore, right? So that's why it's important for them to spend a regular cadence, enough of time to keep present in the marketing function so that that divide doesn't happen. So it's up to them to really keep strategy and execution together and work with the Scrum team to do all the Lean UX principles that we know really help support Scrum.
Yeah, awesome. So I think this is actually a great question. Is the Scrum team a real end-to-end multifunctional team in the scenarios you're talking about?
in a real end-to-end. So what do they mean by that?
So I'll take it as this, and Patrick, feel free to add to your question. But the way I read Patrick's question is the Scrum team responsible for delivering the entire, what I call, whole product? And to me, whole product includes all of the marketing collateral, campaigns, all of those things. So are you viewing the Scrum team, and in your experience that you're doing at Scotia, is your Scrum team multifunctional in delivering the whole product?
Well, yeah, we do a whole product, but what I've seen the struggle is that usually happens is how to work together. So at first it stalls one up. Like when I talked earlier about having to get central approvals, that will delay things up. So when that becomes an impediment, then we work on how do we begin to really scale or push down those approvals to do that. But eventually, I see it becomes part of the team's definition of done. Because when the marketing and product are going out together, it's got to be part of some DoD, either at the Scrum team level or at the organizational DoD, right? Of we make sure nothing leaves without all these ticked off. So it starts out with that intent, but it takes a while, but it does eventually get there. It's just learning how to work differently.
Excellent. So often marketing teams depend on other departments and groups that maybe aren't using any sort of agile methods or frameworks. How do you deal with the fact that we're working across an organization that some people in the or some groups in the organization are agile and others aren't? How do you overcome that?
What I've learned is radiate the pain, right? So if the marketing group has to go to a separate copy group or writing group, start tracking that delay time of waiting for that feedback and response and really tie it to a dollar value. Because what I find is any delay that causes the sprint team or the scrum team to miss their sprint goal really comes at a cost of what I've averaged out. An average scrum team is about 50,000 a sprint for 2 week sprints. So if somebody's decision delayed the team of meeting their sprint goal, that was 50 grand. Do it again, that was 100 grand. Mask the problem and get the organizational leaders to figure out ways of how to streamline that bottleneck. There might be a whole variety of ways to fix it, but until you isolate it as a problem, and more importantly, a big enough problem to solve, that's why you want to tap into dollars. Because everybody always looks at what the cost of a solution to fix something is instead of the cost of not fixing it. So really make these cost of delays show up and maybe even visualize it with a bigger Kanban board to show the dependencies and what the costs are. So that way organizations are motivated to reduce that.
Great. So why a hybrid model and not a separate Scrum team for building and a separate Scrum team for marketing?
It would be the same reason why you don't have one Scrum team do development and one do testing. They both got to go together to get it done product. They got to both go together to finish. So why run in two separate entities at that kind of speed where you can merge them together, right? Because we're experimenting with some things now that I've seen that marketing and product teams are going to run separate. My concern is there's still going to be a bit of a disconnect, and we haven't came to that problem yet, but I see that problem's going to arise based on what I've seen at other companies I've worked at. But the more you can merge what's needed to get a done product together on the same team, where they have a shared responsibility for it, you can do the trade-offs more rapidly. Because when they're in distributed teams, then you got to call them together. Then you're having a technology battle versus a marketing battle. By putting it together, you're reducing the lines in the sand of whose battle it is, and then it's our battle to get a product out. So it's moving from you and I to getting the we to ensure that we're all aligned to deliver something at the end of every sprint.
Great. So, often dev teams are using different tools, like say Jira or Trello. Are there other tools that you've had to bring in to help the marketing teams align with the development teams, or other things that you've had to do to kind of help build this hybrid model?
Well, it's more educating them on Jira and those kind of tools on how to use it. The capability, I've had to spend a lot of time educating the marketing group is the use of data, right? Like, how do we know what to build in our product? Like, what type of data do we want to pull out of it? So it's really getting the capability of data analytics to be implied to even make the relationship between marketing and development more of a tighter relationship. So it's understanding what are the things we want to learn about our users' behavior that we can from the product, because we still do the traditional ways of doing it, but then we supplement it with what are the things we want to track in our product. Is it the time they use? Do we want to do a survey to see what kind of person they are? Do we want to track times a day, locations? Figure out what we want to do to learn to model that customer or model the behavior, and begin using that as a talking point for all the different groups to work together on.
Great, thanks, Dave. So in terms of structure, what marketing functions or communications functions do you often include in the Scrum team?
Initially, we usually want people that has an idea of the reason why we're actually even funding this project to start to do it, to understand what the gap is we're trying to close. So that way they can be kind of, are we closing the gap or doing it? So more a marketing, a hybrid between a marketing strategist and a marketing layout person of how they want to see the content place. Like they're not uber strategic, but they're understanding who we want to target to. They have their thumb on the pulse of the market. So usually market researchers, copywriters are good to have on the team as well, because we need to know how to ensure we have the right real estate space on the product to be able to ensure we have enough space for it, and to deal with languages, right? When we're doing it in different languages, does that impact the sizing? So usually the copywriter, the marketing strategist, and sometimes the layout people. It
Great.
depends really on what the product is, whether it's a new product where you're just entering the market, then you might need multiple marketing people on the Scrum team. Whereas if it's a legacy product and it might be on its, at the top of the thing, it might be just keeping the messaging consistent.
Excellent. So here's an interesting one, and that maybe there's a little bit of misunderstanding here as to the role of marketing, but isn't the role of the product owner to work with stakeholders? Is adding marketing into the Scrum team a quick fix of a product owner that's not doing their job?
Wow. That's a pointed question. Um, like we've said in this talk, we see marketing as a contributor and not just a stakeholder, right? Of different messaging, and we want to sense and respond ever quicker. And why we're bringing the marketing person in is to ensure, because they have a responsibility to build things into the product. Most of our stakeholders don't. They're not really contributing. They just want feedback and be able to adjust it. Because they see marketing as part of the how, that's why I want them in the dev team, and I've seen it work better. But this is at scale. If we're at smaller companies, we're naturally going to work together anyways. Now, there's still stakeholder management probably by the upper level of marketing that the product owner will do, and they're probably going to have to campaign to make sure that their marketer doesn't get pulled off their Scrum team. So they're still probably doing that stakeholder management, but the marketing people that are in the Scrum teams are actually responsible to work with the teams to deliver some certain parts of deliverables that impact the product and the marketing of that product.
That's a great answer, Dave, and I fully agree. Having spent most of my career, as I said earlier, in exactly these types of roles and on Scrum teams in these roles, it's about delivering whole product. It's not bringing marketing in to go do backlog items and bring in customer feedback, although we're all bringing customer feedback back to the product owner as everybody is stakeholders, but it's about building out the whole product. It's having the marketing team tightly engaged and coupled with the coders, if we're talking about building a software product, for example, to deliver everything that is needed to deliver a whole product to market. That includes messaging, that includes data sheets and content and web copy, as well as the marketing communications pieces and press releases and the articles and blogs and all the way through to the campaigns that are going to drive that thing to market. It's not about the product owner's job. This is really about how do we build cohesive teams to bring products to market together. And I've worked in plenty of organizations where there's too much us and them. You
Yeah,
sit.
yeah. And that's why when you say, should we bring customer support in the Scrum team? No, because they got to be responsive to customer feedback that they're getting on the phone and answering their questions. That's why we don't put them part of the Scrum team, but they're stakeholders we got to manage. Now, if customer support is ever building something in the product way in the future, then yeah, then they would be part of the Scrum team. But if you don't have any hands-on involvement in the how, then you're a stakeholder. If you do, you're part of the team.
Yeah, and it's it comes back to that cohesiveness and bringing it together. I've sat on teams where you hear the marketing team complaining that what's being delivered isn't what they need to be able to go to market. The development team just says, well, marketing doesn't understand what we're building and they're not marketing it right. And you get into this blame game and everyone starts blaming each other versus bringing them together and really building a way so that we're working together. We all have skin in the game, and we're all working together toward a common goal. And I think that's a big part of this by combining that team. So I think we probably have time for one or two more, and there's plenty of questions out there.
And we're both required and, we're both required to deliver at a fast pace. So if we got to deliver in a faster pace, why not do it together to make sure we don't get misaligned?
Exactly. So are marketing Scrum iterations tied to a product schedule, for example, dev, release, support, upgrade? How do you start to build out your sprint? I guess the question is tied to how are we building out our sprint schedule?
Building out your sprint
Yeah,
schedules. Okay,
I'm
I
not
was
fully
gonna
sure I
say,
understand the
wow,
question, but
I'm like, that's a bigger problem to solve. But
yeah.
to that question's point, there's certain marketing that has to go ahead of the product. And that's what usually the strategy team is more responsible for. When I see the hybrid model, so they're the ones doing the messaging ahead of time to really get it excited and to really build that up, which might be blog posts. Any of the things of the details of each iterative release falls on the marketing person on the team. So each group has a different responsibility. The person on the dev team might help inform the strategy person of the longer term marketing kind of collateral and campaigns that start. But then as we get more and more to once it's launched and every iterative release after that, it falls more on the marketing within the dev team. So the hybrid model usually does the pre-launch and a bit of the pre-releases, and the teams really detail that and really drive that into the product.
Great, and thank you, Dave. And I want to be conscious of time here. So, Lindsay, if we can go to the next slide.
I think it's just a thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to thank everybody for their time today. Certainly, lots of questions, and I know we didn't get to every one of them. We'll try to do that via email. Thank you, Dave, for taking the time out of your busy schedule and helping out here as well. And let's if you have questions, feel free to reach out. You can reach out directly to Dave via his Scrum.org profile, Scrum.org/Dave not underscore Dave dash Dame, or you can just search for him on the website and you can reach out directly there. Follow Scrum.org on our forums, Twitter, our blog. Dave's doing a lot of video blogs as well as written blogs, and this series. And if you have other questions, you can always reach out to many experts in the forum as well. So with that, thank you, Dave. Thank you to the audience, and everybody have a great rest of your day.